Hi, nice to have you with us again. We're going to be looking at the financial side of marriage in this show. Before 1984, there were only two ways you could get married: in community of property and out of community of property. Now we'll look at what both of those were and look at how the landscape has changed and where you stand, or if you are planning on getting married, what you need to look for on the financial side of it. Joining us is the technical head of department of the Financial Planning Institute, Almo Lubowski. Almo, thank you very much for joining us on the show. Thanks. Nice to have you with us. Right, let's go back before 1984.
Okay.
Because I think there's probably a fair amount of viewers who were married then, and they only had those two choices. Is that correct? In and out of community of property?
Yes, by the sounds of it, I mean, you seem to know a little bit more than me. I'm not exactly sure about the
legalities.
The exact date. But yeah, that's possible. Usually the legislation wouldn't be retrospective, so which means it wouldn't go back. So anyone that's married before then would either be in or out. After that, obviously, came the introduction of the accrual system. So,
okay.
Yeah.
Now, okay, in community of property meant that you each owned what you owned. Was that out of community of property?
That would be out.
Out.
Yes.
In community of property, what you own, I own, and what I own, you own.
Yeah, so look at it as like a kind of a two balls,
yeah,
and they suddenly become one.
Okay.
And you basically then share 100% 50-50 down the line in that property. That's in community of property.
Right.
Out of community of property would mean you keep your ball, I keep my ball.
Okay. And if my ball gets bigger than yours, then that's my ball to keep playing with. I get to play with the bigger ball, and you get to play with the smaller ball.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds disgusting, actually.
No, it's not, because I think I remember a graph drawn in one of my law classes. It's sort of like, it's you know, in communities it becomes one big pool of assets.
Now the problem with in community of property is that if I, as the husband, let's say I've been working for 40 years for a bank, and I go off and open my own business. If I go down the tubes, they can attach everything that I own, and that includes what my wife owns as well.
Yeah, so I mean, it's nice to talk about assets, but if you have debts to accompany those assets, you also share in those.
Okay.
So yeah, and that's why often when you buy assets, when you're in community, you both actually have to sign. You'll find that you know, like bank contracts and things like that, when you're buying a house, if you're in community of property, you both have to sign that, because you're both going to be liable for the debts and things such as that.
Now, my understanding is that this, and I'm sticking to the 1984 sort of cutoff date here.
Yeah.
This was, and I'm not clever.
Yeah.
The only reason I know this is because I've got a wonderful producer who sends me a whole load of information. So according to Natasha, so if I'm wrong, it's not my fault, it's Natasha, okay? According to Natasha, that before 84, if you were married in community of property and you wanted to change that to out of community of property, you had to approach the High Court to get that changed.
Yes, and that's the case even now if you want to change your marital regime.
Oh, really?
Because one thing what you must remember is that in South Africa, if you just get married, so today, you know, I choose someone and I say, let's get married. We go either to the Home Affairs or we go to a marriage officer who's licensed to get you married. If you then get married and there's no other contract, you just did it, you are automatically in community. So that's a big danger that you must remember in South Africa. If you're not going to decide on this and that's the case right now, then to go change that, you still have to approach the High Court. So even now, it would need to be one of those scenarios. Now, some people have done is they would potentially get divorced, do a quick divorce, and get remarried. But you know, the court does look at those situations. So actually, they want you to go and do a proper application, because for creditors that have that you know, when we're talking about those debts that you have potentially, they might be prejudiced.
Yes.
So you want to have a situation where they are able to say, no, but this couple actually owes us money, and this might be to our disadvantage if their marital regime is changed. So going to do it on the sly, like getting divorced and getting remarried with an antenuptial contract, is kind of frowned upon.
Yeah, I can see why. You just suddenly move all your assets into your wife's name and say, well,
Or
sorry guys, I've got nothing.
Yeah, and we're now married and out of community property. Yeah.
So, in other words, little Almo goes off with, are you married?
Yes.
What's your wife's name?
Marilise.
Marilise.
Yes.
So little Almo goes off to, where's your favorite destination in the world?
In the world, jeez. I like Cape Town. So
Cape Town. So little Almo goes down to Cape Town, bumps into Marilise on Camps Bay, the beachfront.
We actually met at a bar in Cape Town called The Shack.
The Shack?
Yeah, The Shack.
Okay, so Almo walks into The Shack, there's Marilise, he's smitten, and they rush off and they go and get married. Big problem because they found out they're in community of property. They haven't thought that through.
And Jeremy, you'll find that a lot of, and no offense, I mean, educated people that make that mistake. I've come across some people, I mean, even guys that are investment managers of big funds, and I'm using that example because we're talking about money, that actually went to go get married and didn't do an antenuptial contract and found out that in South Africa, you're automatically in community of property.
Okay, now post 84, the landscape has changed rather radically because there are all sorts of other types of marriage that have come into the mix which are perfectly acceptable in the eyes of the law.
Yeah, I mean, the first change you would have had, if I'm not mistaken, and I do stand under correction in terms of the dates and exact changes in legislation. Yep. I didn't update myself on that 100%, but you have a third option, which is when you want to be out of community, you have what's called an antenuptial contract. Now that you can have two scenarios in an antenuptial contract. The one is total out of community of property. And the other one is out of community of property with the accrual system. So that's the change, I think, that
what is the accrual system? So
the accrual system basically is a situation where while you're married, it's a better option because you're out of this scenario, like you're in community where you share in profit and loss and assets and debt kind of scenario. With accrual, you then out. But what happens on death or divorce, you actually do kind of then get a split of assets. But what happens there is, like yourself, Jeremy, you know, successful, you're making lots of money, so your asset base has grown. Your asset base has grown, but your wife stayed at home looking after the kids and things such as that. So she came into the marriage with 1,000 Rand, you came into the marriage with 2,000 Rand, but your estate has grown to 50,000 Rand in the meantime. You then take the difference between your growth and what you started with and her, and then you divide it by 2. Okay. So you can exclude assets as well, which is nice if you've got an antenuptial contract. Now a lot of people see the accrual system as a fairer scenario because ultimately a marriage is something that you do together. So you know, in a way, even though she stayed at home, she gave you the ability to have a family. You went out to work. You know, you've made that decision. So ultimately, she should get something for that probably. So accrual is just a fairer way of doing it, but it only happens at death or divorce.
I suppose it's something that a lot of people don't think of. You know, we look at these contracts that you go in before marriage. To be perfectly honest, and I think people shy away from accepting it, the contract has got nothing to do with marriage. No. It's got everything to do with the possibility of divorce. To be honest, and the divorce rate in this country is very high. But
and obviously
you need to accept that and understand that when you're sitting down. When I got married to my current wife, and I call her my current wife just to keep her on her toes. Okay. When I got married to my current wife, we had to sit down and accept that and say, you know, in the case of us getting divorced. This is what the reality is going to be, so we need to put this contract in place. And people tend to sort of shy away from that because they don't want to think that way. They're all starry-eyed. Yeah, I mean that's the one thing I think often they don't think about it, so they don't plan. I think it's with any kind of money situation and things. I mean, you do need to accept that a certain amount of planning must take place. Otherwise, you'll find yourself in a situation which you didn't want because a lot of things can happen.
And I think what some of the things I've heard, when dealing with people and planning with them and things like that, is that, there's this kind of the connotation of, well, are you expecting us to get divorced? I mean, do you foresee it happening down the line? And then it's an emotional thing that I think you need to, have a clearer head and say, look, let's be practical about this. You never know what could happen. But also in situations of say death, there's also things you need to consider when you're planning, and how you're going to get married could have an effect on how your estate gets wound up. I mean, there's not a major difference between the two, but it's one of those things that you do with planning. So people must just be, I think, adults about it and say, well, we're going to sit down and plan. But unfortunately, it's not always like that. And then you get the scenario where, as an example, someone would come to me and say, look, my wife's she doesn't want to sign an antenuptial contract. He thinks it's a bad thing because, we don't want to get divorced and whatever. So I need to talk to you about some other options. And then you get into things like where the husband would, for instance, put everything in a trust and say, well, maybe that's an option. So I'll put all my assets in trust. So when we get divorced, it's not going to. But there's also scenarios where the courts have looked at that and said, well, that's not quite a good way to do it.
It's not equitable. It's
not equitable and things such as that. But that more has to do sometimes with the administration of the trust, but that's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, but I suppose it does. The lines are becoming even more blurred and need to be defined because of the nature of the changing nature of marriages. Because now acceptable in the eyes of the law are traditional African marriages, as well, same-sex marriages.
Yes.
And there are all sorts of. I mean, there must be legal minefields in marriages, same-sex marriages, as an example.
And I mean, that was the thing. I mean, before you actually would allow those marriages, those people were in an awkward situation because of assets as well. Especially in a situation where they couldn't get married, and then, for instance, something happens and they don't get, and they've been maybe the person that has been more at home, and the other one has been a sort of a breadwinner, and they don't get what's due to them because marriage is a financial thing ultimately. So our laws dictate financial situations depending on how you are married. So and especially with a thing like a same-sex marriage where the person has, as I said, been there, the one's breadwinner, the other one's at home, and then they find themselves in a situation where that person's doesn't get the financial benefit of having been the person at home supporting the breadwinner and things such as that. But ultimately, no matter how, if it's a traditional marriage and things, if you register the marriage as a civil marriage or whatever, it's registered, you still get only the three scenarios that in which way you are going to be seen as being married: in community, out of community, and out of community with accrual.
Okay, it does though beg the question, what do you need to consider financially before you go into this thing called marriage? And that's what we're going to get onto in just a moment. Don't go anywhere.